For Creamer Media's Polity, I am Shannon de Rehove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Graca Machel recently delivered a lecture at MISTRA on the question of identities. Do you believe her lecture added anything to our understanding of identity?
Yes, I found this a very important intervention. There's a very well-known statement of the late Graca Machel where he says, "For the nation to live, the tribe must die." And she was asked to consciously address that statement. And I was very, very impressed. It's in written form, but then there's a bit more if one watches the video. She says some things there that are very important. What Graca Machel does basically is she traces the notion of the tribe as being the intimate social environment where people are born, intimate social, emotional environment where people are born. And it is a seed that may grow into something else, but it can't be eradicated. She says, out of the seed of an orange grows. Out of the seed of an avocado grows. But what she argues is that the fact that only an avocado seed can produce an avocado doesn't mean that a seed cannot be transformed. And her idea is that the notion of the tribe or the identity, as people prefer to sometimes say ethnic identity, but I think tribe is something very specific. The notion of the tribe is not something that is antagonistic to wider identities and notions like the nation. And while retaining this original identity, it can be transformed and be quite compatible. The tribe can feed into the nation and enrich it, and the nation can feed and enrich the tribe. Now, in the video, she starts with a very interesting anecdote, which tells us something about what one confronts when one simply wants to say that the tribe must die. She says when she entered the training camp for Frelimo, which is a young woman, some people came there who couldn't speak Portuguese. Some people came there who knew Frelimo, but they didn't know anything outside of their village. They didn't know that Mozambique had a sea. They didn't experience electricity till they joined Frelimo. I know people in South Africa who also didn't see electricity when they were in the rural areas till they went into Langa or one of these places in Cape Town. So what she's saying, and also because they didn't have the common language of the colonial power, Portuguese, when they were trained and they said turn left, they didn't know what that meant. They had to gesture and learn by the gestures. So what she was trying to say is that these were the people out of whom the nationalist movement, the national liberation movement, Frelimo, was born. And one cannot eradicate that. And I think what she really says that statement of Graca Machel is not one that should be followed, because there can be a creative interrelationship between a tribal or ethnic identity and a national one. Now this has got importance for us, because many of the most important national liberation movements on this continent have tended to be antagonistic to tribalism and to ethnic identities, and seen these as being divisive or chauvinist. And they learnt this from hard experience, where at the time when Lumumba was assassinated in 1960, there was an attempted secession from Katanga region, which was tribally based. So when African states established one-party states in the early mid-60s, one of the reasons for doing this is that they wanted to guard their sovereignty as a newly established state, and they didn't want division, which they saw being fostered by tribalism. Now, in the history of the ANC, this is something that has loomed large from the beginning. Various chiefdoms were defeated because the colonial powers played divide and rule, and very often one chiefdom sided with the British or the Boers in defeating people. So in 1909, Pixley Ka Isaka Seme, before the formation of the ANC, said, "We must be done with tribal animosities. We are one." In other words, the only way you could build a national movement, he called his talk Native Union, an alternative union to the Union of South Africa, was not to have these divisions. But I think what Graca Machel is indicating is that division, the notion of tribalism, the notion of ethnicity, is not necessarily a negative phenomenon. It can be one that is part of building unity without having to eradicate a tribal identity. I think we've got to understand, just as these young women to whom she referred could only speak the language of their the area from which they came, who are we to have contempt for what they have experienced and grown up with culturally, linguistically, and in other beliefs? And I think if you read the speech and watch it, it's got other things that are very important relating to the relationship between nationalism and nations and Pan-Africanism, various other things.
What is the lesson for nation building in South Africa?
Well, the question of nation building, I find, has had various features that are problematic. What I would call the national liberation model poses the national liberation movement as the sole and authentic representative of the people, and that was what they were called by the OAU and the United Nations. And they depict the ANC as the nation, or in Ghana, the Convention People's CPP, Convention People's Party. CPP is Ghana, Ghana is CPP. And I think there's a tendency with forming national identities to erase, to be anti-pluralist, to erase identities other than the national. The Polokwane Conference Strategy and Tactics document, for example, says we will recognize all other identities. There must be unity and diversity, but the other identities must feed into the national. So there's a notion which is hierarchical, where the nation is the main thing and everything else is subordinate and should feed into it. Now, what Graca Machel is arguing, what I agree with, is a sort of horizontal type relationship where there are a number of interrelationships between peoples and organizations and entities, some being broader in their scope, but nevertheless having a respectful relationship to the others. The anti-pluralism of the notion of the national liberation movement model is also found in other ways, where it doesn't pay enough attention to forms of oppression which they are trying to remedy, which don't fit immediately into the national. For example, gender, sexuality, and things like that. So what we've got to be arguing is not that a national identity must be removed, but that it must be respected, but must also stand in a respectful relationship to other identities, whether tribal, sexual, gender, etc., etc.
Thank you for your insight.
Thanks a lot.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking about South Africa's political scene.